Recent escalations in the Middle East have pulled global attention back to the Strait of Hormuz. When military tensions rise in this narrow corridor, the public usually watches the energy markets. We expect a blockade to disrupt the flow of oil, assuming that naval conflict primarily threatens the price at the gas pump. But oil is not the most critical resource passing through these waters. The real catastrophe is fertilizer. 20% of the world's entire supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz, and right now, that supply is trapped. For an entire month, the flow of those agricultural inputs came to a complete halt. This creates a hole in the supply chain of ships that farmers rely on to prepare for the coming year. Because this fertilizer won't reach farmers before the planting season, estimates for the coming year suggest global food production could fall by 10 to 25%.
A disruption of this scale suggests that, very soon, there simply will not be enough food to go around. There is a common assumption that wealthy Western countries are insulated from these shortages. We imagine that our financial power and infrastructure act as a shield against global resource shocks. Economist Steve Keen, who famously predicted the 2008 financial crisis, warns that the opposite is true. He argues that wealthy nations are actually the most fragile actors in this crisis. Keen's warning centers on the way modern economic models ignore physical reality. By prioritizing financial efficiency over the actual physical inputs required for survival, we have built a system with no room for error. Because those hard inputs have been compromised, global famine is a direct threat to the citizens of the wealthiest nations, rather than a crisis confined to the developing world. Farming is governed by physics and biology, not financial quarters. Planting seasons follow a rigid clock that does not wait for a delayed shipment or a political resolution. Fertilizer must be available to bond with seeds during a highly specific biological window. This is the moment the plant requires an immediate nutrient boost to establish its roots and ensure a full harvest. If that fertilizer arrives even 2 weeks late, the window closes. The growing period for the plant is missed, and that year's potential harvest is effectively lost. Our current economic model, just-in-time manufacturing, was designed to save money by eliminating storage warehouses. But as this chart shows, a 1-month gap in a just-in-time pipeline means missing the biological deadline entirely. Western economies traded their physical agricultural safety buffers for financial efficiency. We optimized for low costs during times of peace, leaving ourselves with no reserves when the system breaks. The data shows exactly how deep that vulnerability goes. While the U.S. produces much of its own fertilizer, countries like the UK and Australia have almost no physical buffer. The UK imports 40% of its food, and Australia holds only about 30 days of oil to keep its farm equipment moving. China, however, is a massive outlier. They have spent years hoarding resources, building an inventory that covers over 1.5 years of fertilizer, grain, and fuel. The Chinese government prioritizes hard physical resources over financial metrics. They built these massive silos because they anticipated that the global trade system would eventually face a major disturbance. Without those stockpiles, the collapse happens quickly. India is projected to run out of domestic fertilizer in just 2 to 3 months, making it one of the first regions to face a direct threat of famine. In a world without enough food, financial wealth becomes irrelevant. A nation's survival depends entirely on the physical data of its stockpiles, not the strength of its currency. The 1-month pause at the Strait of Hormuz represents a permanent deficit. For this year's harvest, a 20% drop in the global fertilizer supply is already a reality. Theoretically, mass starvation could be avoided if countries with massive stockpiles voluntarily shared their grain and fertilizer with the nations that have none. But the political reality of a survival crisis is far different. History shows that when resources become scarce, politicians prioritize their own citizens and begin hoarding whatever they have left. As international trust evaporates, trade networks freeze. Countries that once relied on the smooth, just-in-time flow of goods suddenly find themselves isolated and unable to procure the inputs they need to survive. By treating food production like a factory assembly line, we removed the buffers that protect human life. The collision of just-in-time economics with this physical supply disruption guarantees a patchwork of severe famines and social breakdown across the globe this year.